Cool. So my name is Jason, as most of you already know. I currently work for HealthPost as e-commerce manager for HealthPost. We're New Zealand's largest natural health products pure play e-tailer. So we have been in business for nearly 30 years, 28 years, and started out as a mail order, family-owned, small mail order company down in the South Island of New Zealand. And we're still, our headquarters, if you want to call it that, is still based in the same place. It's a place called Greenwood, which is about a 2-hour drive south of Nelson, and it's literally a village. We employ, I think it's over 90% of Collingwood residents are employed by HealthPost. So I suppose if we shut our doors, then I don't know, Collingwood would have to do something else for employment. So we employ a lot of people in Collingwood. We're the largest single employer in the whole of Golden Bay. So you know, it's still a family-owned business. So the son of the founders is our CEO. So it was a couple. It was his parents. Abel is the CEO, and it was his parents that founded the company 28 years ago. Founded out of a spare bedroom in their house. Abel's mum was really into natural health, holistic health. She had some health issues that she treated holistically, and her friends were like, "Hey, where did you get this stuff? How can I get this stuff? This stuff looks really good." And she started bringing it in from all over New Zealand and storing it in her back bedroom, and then sort of selling it to her mates. And then she started doing weekend markets, and it kind of just, the business grew from there. And so the business is still family owned. Abel's dad is still on the board of directors for the company. So you know, it's still a family run business, and you know, it's an exciting business. We've got a New Zealand website, an Australian website. Our fastest growing market is China. So you know, we're trying to crack the China market. It's a hard market, very, very challenging market, but it's too big to ignore for us as a business. So that's what I'm doing now. But the point, I guess, of where I wanted to kind of take this discussion from a high level for today was kind of how I got to become in the digital space, where I started, what kind of, I guess, my learning curve was, getting into starting my own pure play online business, ran that for nearly 8 years and sold that, and then went back agency side again, and then back merchant side now. So I guess that evolution of where I came from and how I got to be in this industry in the first place, and then the things, hopefully from a very high level, in the first instance, a bit of a helicopter view of some of the main things that I learned to get to where I am today. And then a little bit more granular, a little bit more of the tactical stuff. Some of the things that I have learned tactically, because I've now worked, the only part of, I guess, e-commerce, if you want to think of it broadly, that I haven't worked in is I haven't worked vendor side yet. So I've never worked for Magento, I've never worked for Demandware, I've never worked for any of the major technology vendors that we use. So I have worked merchant side, I've worked agency side, and I've had a pure play. So I've kind of covered off part of the industry, but not that vendor side yet. So hopefully I've got some experience. I'm old. I'm 41 years old, so I'm not a spring chicken anymore. And so hopefully, you know, I've been in this industry for over 15 years now. So it's a long time, I suppose, to be in any one industry, and hopefully some of my experiences will be useful to you. As Tony said, as I go through, if you have any questions and something I say doesn't make sense, just stop me and say, hey, we'll leave some time at the end for questions anyway. But as I'm going through, if you have any specific questions that are, you know, kind of on point right then and there, feel free to just shout out and we'll stop, okay? So if we go back sort of roughly 15 years ago, I started out, my career was actually in hospitality. So I worked in restaurants. I worked in restaurant management for almost 8 years. So in the States, I'm originally American, so that's where I kind of got my start of working with people, if you will. And I'm a big people person. I love the human interactions. I'm a big fan of humanity. So yeah, so I love meeting people. I love making relationships, and I love making people happy. Basically, is a big part of my life, and connecting people. I like connecting people. And so when I moved to New Zealand, my grandfather was a Kiwi. My parents, my sister, myself were all dual citizens, and we were sick of the bullshit in the States. Basically, sick of California, sick of everything that is bad about America, I suppose. There's some good things too, but we were sick of the bad stuff, so we said, let's move to New Zealand. New Zealand seems like a really cute, nice place. Seems like it would be a place for a great lifestyle. I'm really into the outdoors, so New Zealand was naturally attractive for me. I've been into motorbikes my whole life, so New Zealand's a great place to be into motorbikes. And so I was already living on my own. I'd already moved out from my parents' house, and I was flatting at that stage and working in hospitality. And I decided, my parents said basically, we're going to move to New Zealand. You're more than welcome to come along if you want. And it was like, okay, cool. California's not going anywhere. If I really hate it, well then I can move back. And moved to New Zealand. So moved to Christchurch originally. Spent 10 years in Christchurch. That was challenging. The weather in Christchurch is really challenging. Very cold for a California boy. So I come from Southern California, a nice sunny place. Probably not quite as sunny as Brazil, but...
No, sometimes it's more than Brazil.
Yeah, but maybe not as consistent. I don't know, but yeah. So it was definitely hard moving from Southern California, just outside of Los Angeles, to Christchurch. That was a big shift for me. It was a culture shock. You know, even though the language was mostly the same, it was still a big culture shock. So the first 12 months were really challenging for me. Christchurch is a hard place culturally to break into. It's a very, most people, they grow up together, they go to school together, they have their own networks, their own friends, and it's really hard to break into that. And I slowly did, and then through basically a friend of a friend, I continued to work in hospitality. I continued to work in restaurant management. We set up a family business when we first moved here, a tourist business. So hiring out 4-wheel push bikes. They were basically like, if you can think of the Flintstones car with pedals, that's basically what our bikes look like. So we set that up in Christchurch. My parents ran that, and then I went and did hospitality. And the way that I got into digital after hospitality was I had a friend who worked for a web hosting company. And she said, look, we're looking for somebody that kind of knows their stuff and can get in on the ground floor of this business. We did web development as well, but it was primarily focused on web hosting, but we did web development to support building the hosting business, right? And bringing new customers. So I said, oh yeah, that looks good. Went and met with the boss. Boss was actually an American from the States. He had married a Kiwi, and so he was here and he started a business. He had 2 Kiwi kids here, and that's how I got my start. And we decided to start working together. I worked back in those days, and this is going back almost 15 years ago, so back in those days, there wasn't really, the agency space was still very much the Wild West. There weren't any real specific job titles for anybody in digital. There was designers, sure, and that was probably the only real job title there was at the time, was maybe a graphic designer or a digital designer. That was kind of the only job title in digital you could have.
IT guy.
Yeah, IT. Yeah, webmaster. Webmaster. Webmaster was the title that everybody who had their own website, whether it was e-commerce, whether it was, and at that point there wasn't a lot of e-commerce happening either. It was mostly just bespoke websites with a bit of content on them, brochure websites. And so everybody that had one of those called themselves a webmaster. And so I didn't really know what to call myself at that particular point. There were no solution architects. There were no anything. And we didn't have a digital marketing practice in the business. And we started getting huge amounts of inquiries from our customers. We maybe built them a website, we'd host their website, and then what? And then they come back to us and they go, but we need our website to make money. We need this thing to pay for itself. You're charging us X dollars a month and it's not doing anything for us. And so I established our own internal practice for web marketing. And at that point in the web world, as you probably all know, web marketing was really nascent. And so SEO consisted of you using a couple of websites, links.nl and a few other websites out there to spider your website, look at keyword density, target the keywords you want, make sure it's all right, make sure your page titles are correct, make sure you might have some meta tags on your images, and let's call it good. That was pretty much the sum total of SEO, and submitting to Moz and a couple of other directories. That was it. And then it evolved a little bit after that into link building and getting inbound links. So trading links with directories. I still remember to this day one of the first times I ever solicited inbound links for my clients' websites was going to link websites and going to Google and searching for directories related to all of my customers' websites so I could submit links to those directories. And that was that we outsourced a lot of our digital marketing to specialist PPC agencies in our area. That all they did was AdWords. So it was pretty much AdWords and SEO. That was digital marketing at that point in the world. And I had a huge number of my clients that were paying 5 cents a click. For years, they were paying 5 cents a click because the uptake of AdWords, particularly in New Zealand, was so slow that there was so little competition for traffic. And so traffic was cheap. It was really, really cheap. We didn't even have terms like conversion rate optimization. We didn't even know what that discussion meant. We didn't even really measure conversions. GA wasn't around. Urchin was, but it was expensive. And so analytics tools didn't really exist. We had server-side analytics tools that showed us a little bit and presented traffic data in kind of a graph model, but that was all server-based data. And so for us, there was no really good analytics tools at that time. AdWords, actually, funnily enough, one of the reasons why our clients in many instances took on AdWords, it wasn't to generate traffic, it was so they knew who the fuck their customers were. It was actually AdWords data and AdWords tracking had much, much better data than anything else around at that time. So it was kind of the closest thing to kind of a web analytics tool where you could actually start to understand a little bit more about what drove customers to your website. Because you didn't even know what keywords drove them to your website unless you were running AdWords. So you had absolutely no idea whether your SEO efforts were actually working, whether they weren't working. It was just difficult. Everything about the internet was difficult at that point. Does anybody remember frame-based websites? We had navigation within pages. Does anybody remember those? Yeah? I'm sure you do. Do you remember frame-based websites? So there was this horrible technology that took root for probably 2 years in the web space called frames. And so the reason why I think it became popular, it's basically a page within a page. So you'd have, for example, your left-hand navigation, for example, would be in its own unique page with its own unique URL, and then the primary page content would be in the middle, and it would have its own separate URL. You'd have one single URL for the page, but you'd effectively have, underneath that, you'd have sub-URLs. And so you could open one part of the page in a new window, and you'd actually see its real URL. Or you could open the navigation in a new page, and you'd actually see its real URL. So one of the reasons why I think that became popular was because web developers could build these select sections. It was before templates and reusable content really became about. There was no Dreamweaver yet. It was all bespoke, handcrafted HTML. And so in order to create these templates, I think the reason designers started using frames was so that they could build one piece of content on a page and build it once and then reuse that as its own frame, and then only the stuff in the middle is the stuff they had to rebuild as custom pages. I think that's kind of, would you say that's probably why it kind of got its start?
It was cheap Ajax.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Now, the problem with this from an SEO perspective is Google couldn't index frames. So you would see the master page, but you can only see one frame of content. So if your primary content wasn't within the primary frame, you were fucked. So SEO, you could do all the SEO in the world you wanted on your primary content, but if it was in a frame that Google couldn't see, it didn't matter. But we didn't give a shit because we didn't even know what conversion was. We weren't measuring it. We weren't tracking it. So we couldn't tell the customer that it wasn't working, or the customer had no idea that it wasn't working. So we made it through the frame age, thank God, and frames were eventually, it was made taboo by Google and everybody stopped doing frames. Then we got into Flash, and Flash became the absolute norm for web development. And so the agency that I worked for, we were doing bespoke web development, primarily in Flash. And that became a real problem too, because of course Google doesn't index Flash. They do a little bit now, but nothing back then. There was everything that was locked up inside Flash, from a user experience perspective, there was nothing indexed by Google for it. And so you'd have all these massively interactive websites that had all singing, all dancing, amazing interactive experiences, and none of it was being indexed by Google. So it was like building the flashiest billboard in the world and then sticking it on the side of a building that had another building a half a meter away from it, and the only time you could see it was when you were walking down the footpath and you look up between the two buildings, you might see the edge of the billboard. That was what Flash-based websites were like back in those days. You'd spend $50,000, no, actually probably not $50,000 back then. Probably more like $5,000. A very expensive website was $5,000 to $10,000 back then. And so Google, once again, basically came down on the industry and said, you can't build Flash. We can't index it. So if you want to be found on Google, don't build a Flash website. And it was like, shit, now what do we build in? So that's when the advent of things like Dreamweaver and Fireworks and some of the other tools started to make their way to the market, to standardize kind of how things went. So I stayed with that business for about a year, and then I quickly realized I'm helping all these businesses make quite a lot of money. Why am I not doing that for myself? Why don't I just build my own website? was like, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. Why don't I go do my own thing? And I had a very, very good friend of mine who worked in the electronics industry. He worked for Tate Electronics, which is a very large New Zealand-based electronics manufacturer, based down in the South Island, based in Christchurch. He had been in sourcing for Tate Electronics for about 6 years, and because he'd been in sourcing for so long for electronics, he knew all the sources of all electronic components pretty much everywhere in the world. So he had direct relationships with Samsung and Toshiba and all the major embedded device manufacturers he had relationships with. So we put our heads together and we said, why don't we do something that combines your skill set, my skill set, and let's try to make some money at this internet thing. Because I could tell straight away, even in the early days, I could tell that this internet thing wasn't going away. I could tell, this shit's painful, this shit's hard, and e-commerce is really hard. So everything was hard, everything was custom built, it was handcrafted, everything with Flash, everything to do with the payment gateway. I mean, we didn't really even have the term payment gateway at that time. If you wanted to do digital payments, most of the time, the first payment method that people rolled with was check. That was the payment method for e-commerce back in the day. Mail me a check. I'll give you my success page. Here's your order ID number. Send me a check. Once it clears into my bank account, I'll ship you your goods. That was how payment methods started, if you can freaking believe that. Then internet banking sort of started to take off, and a couple of the major banks offered it, and then internet banking started to become a little bit more common, and payments. But credit card payments, most people in our industry, they're too young to remember a time when credit cards weren't common, when credit card payments on the internet were not common. And the funny thing is that even when credit card payments became more common, most of the time they were not integrated with the payment gateway. They would store them, they would store the order, and they would store the credit card information on the server. You would access them, you would hand transcribe them onto a form, submit them to your bank in bulk, or print them off if you were able to convert them into a format that your bank could take. You would take them, you would deposit them in with your bank, and then they would clear in batches overnight with your bank. So there was no real-time payment gateway integration. It didn't exist, right? And so I said all that to say that e-commerce was a bitch. It was really, really hard. So when you think about conversion today and eking out a 0.2% gain in conversion, because you paint a button red instead of green, okay? We're talking back then, the barriers to conversion on e-commerce were so fucking high that we weren't thinking, first of all, we didn't even think what conversion was. We didn't even know what that term meant. But secondarily, everything about e-commerce was hard. Building it, maintaining it, supporting it, securing it. There were no standards, and it was an absolute free-for-all. So that was my start in e-commerce, and then OS Commerce came along as a platform. It stands for Open Source Commerce. It was an open source e-commerce platform. So when my business partner and I started our business, what we did is we took the e-commerce platform that my company had built, that I was working for at the time. We did it as a side business. We didn't quit our jobs and go and do e-commerce full time. We did it as a side hustle. Because we thought, shit, if this e-commerce thing doesn't work, I don't really want to be out of work. I don't want to be out of a job. But, I want to try it and I want to give it a go. So we did it. We both had home offices. So we go and work our full 8 or 10 hour day at work, and then we go home and work another full 8 or 10 hours at night on our own business. And it was awesome. We really enjoyed it. And so what we did, our first e-commerce site was actually built on an e-commerce platform. It wasn't dynamic in any way, and it was built in frames that my company had built. And that's how we got started. We did AdWords. 100% of our traffic. There was virtually zero organic traffic at that point. It was almost exclusively AdWords. And the vast majority of the keywords we were targeting in our niche, we were paying 5 cents for. For the first 12 to 18 months, we paid 5 cents a click. And we had virtually zero competition because nobody was doing it. Some things were more expensive, and when something got to 15 or 20 cents, you started thinking about pausing that ad because it was expensive. You're thinking, shit, this is really expensive. But you also have to remember that at that particular point in time, so our business was selling memory cards. So this was when memory cards were super expensive. A 32 megabyte memory card was selling for $650. And we were running 60% margins. So, and we were still the cheapest in New Zealand. We were absolutely the cheapest in New Zealand. So the way we selected our product was based on a couple of things. One is, when we set up our business, we had to have connections to be able to get the product in the first place. That was the hard thing, because in New Zealand, as it is today, but it was even worse back then, there was one master agent or distributor for just about every single brand in the country. So if you wanted to undercut anyone, it meant cutting your own margins, because everybody was buying at the same price. So unless you could find a source of supply for your products that was cheaper than the local distributor by a pretty substantial margin, you would never be competitive, because the big boys, the Harvey Normans, the big retailers were going to smoke you every single time, because the buying quantities that they were buying through the local distributors were so large that they were getting the best buy price New Zealand had to offer. Okay? So we said, screw that, and we wanted to find products, A, that we could source, B, that we felt had great margin, and C, we felt were exceptionally overpriced in New Zealand versus the rest of the world. So those were kind of the criteria we looked at when we first set up our business of what we were actually going to sell. That's how we chose what we were going to sell. So my business partner had access to memory products, and we were buying them directly from Samsung. We were also parallel importing a lot of our product. So instead of buying from the local distributors, we were either buying from the local distributors in other countries, or even, in some respects, our biggest supplier in the first 2 years, our biggest supplier was actually a retailer in America. The largest retailer of memory cards in the States, online. They were a pure play online business. That's who we made a relationship with, and that's who we started buying from. So we were paying retail prices with a slight discount, because we were a wholesale customer buying large quantities. And then retailing them in New Zealand, and retailing them cheaper than anyone else in the country. So that was how we got our start, and it was really amazing when the reason that we switched from the proprietary platform, and it was a true SaaS platform, was hosted by our hosting company, the hosting company that I worked for. So SaaS has been around for a long time. It's just, it hasn't been called SaaS, and it hasn't been called cloud. It was known as a hosted solution, is what it was called. And so I started out on a SaaS platform, and we quickly realized that the functionality, we didn't have any control over the functionality, and the functionality was so poor that we thought, man, if we want to create a really awesome site experience for our customers, how do we do that on a SaaS platform? There's virtually nothing we can change. We don't have access to the code. We can't even have a designer work on it. We're screwed. What are we going to do? So do you guys remember the days when, platforms weren't common? Like, you hear platform names today. You hear the Magentos, you hear the Demandwares, you hear the Hybrises, you hear WordPress, you hear platform names come to mind before even partner names come to mind, right? So do you guys remember the days when the internet, there were no common platforms to build on? Everything was bespoke. Or is everybody too young for that? But does everybody remember the non-platform days?
Front page?
Yeah, oh yeah, front page, there you go. Yeah, I mean, it was a development tool, not a platform though, right?
Yeah.
So that's, and what we did was, we said, okay, we need to do something better, we need to do something different, we need to be able to handcraft our customer experience, and we need to be able to have control of our own destiny. So that was really what prompted us to move away from the SaaS platform we were on. And once again,
I'm calling it a SaaS platform.
it was a SaaS platform. And so we found this product called eCommerce, and it was the first kind of widely available. It wasn't an enterprise product, so it wasn't produced by an IBM, it wasn't produced by an Oracle, it wasn't produced by any of the major players. It was a homegrown product. I think it was originally written in Germany, wasn't it? I can't remember where it originally originated. I think it originated somewhere in Europe.
Never used it.
Okay, good. There you go. So, and what I quickly worked out as I started doing my research is that slowly, open source commerce, OS commerce, started to invade New Zealand in a big way. So almost every single major e-commerce website in New Zealand was running it in the span of about 6 months. It was crazy. The pace at which this platform took over New Zealand, it happened so fast. Even at that point, I was like, wow. And at about that same time, there was a shopping comparison website that hit the market called Price Spy. Okay? So that democratized the internet even further, because the search and find of Google even at that point wasn't that great yet. And so pricing comparison, shopping comparison websites really took off. So you had Get Price in Australia that took off at about the same time, and you had Price Spy in New Zealand that took off at about the same time. And so this was my first exposure to shopping comparison websites, and that site became really prominent about a year after we launched our website. And so I had a relationship with the guy who was the webmaster of Price Buy and make sure that we were giving him a product feed, and that was my first experience with providing product feeds. How do we do that? Okay, it's a CSV. Oh my God, what's an FTP server? Okay, cool. I have to shunt this over to an FTP server so that you can pick this file up and you can index it properly. Oh no, actually we can spider your website. Okay, well what does that mean? And how do we have to format the data? And so all these things, I got a really quick, dirty education in a lot of web technology in a very compressed span of time, just because we were trying to make money online.
What year was that?
This is about 15 years ago, so yeah. So there was no cool shit to play with back then. And when we wanted to change our website, so one of the first things we wanted to do is every single OS Commerce website looked the same, because they had the same base theme. There was no such thing as a theming engine. So what they did is they simply had a bunch of folders on the web server, and all of the icons, for example, for the website, and all the colors and all that stuff, they just sat in a big media folder that got pulled into the website. So it was still a database-driven website. It was still a MySQL-backed website. And so whenever you wanted to change things, there was no modular way, there was no theming engine. So what you had to do is you basically had to download all of the images from the image folder. You then had to have your graphic designer craft you images that would replace those images, but you keep the file names the same. And then you would just upload those files and write over what was the default, and then all of a sudden you had a new theme. But the look and feel of the website was exactly the same. But just the imagery and the colors were slightly different. So that's how we customized our website back in the day. Yeah, that was as custom as it got. Was having a graphic designer take the 336 stock images from your platform and handcraft all of the iconography, all of the background imagery, all of the checkout buttons, basically every button, every picture on the site was handcrafted by a digital designer. And then they would upload that, and there was no such thing as a staging server, so it was kind of like, well, let's just push it up to the live server and let's see if it works. There was no version control. There was none of that. It didn't exist. It didn't exist. It was all the closest thing we had to versioning was before we would push something live, we would back up the database in case the whole thing shat itself. And then we could push up a copy of the database and overwrite the live database with a backup copy. So that was the closest thing we got to versioning at that particular point in time. So that was how we got to where we were, and the business was wildly successful. So even though we had huge amounts of pain initially, the business was wildly successful. We went from $0 in revenue in year one to within 2 years of our founding, we're doing over $1 million a year in revenue. Now, I don't know about you guys, but back in the day, $1 million in revenue through an e-commerce site was a lot of money. It was a lot of money for us. And our biggest problem, our biggest challenge when we first started was growth. And it was growing so fast, and we were doubling revenue month over month for the first 2 years. And so it just became so difficult to keep up with the growth. We were investing 100% of our revenue back into buying more stock. So we didn't drop ship. We owned all. We would buy all of our stock. We would import it in. We put it in a warehouse. At this point, it was in my business partner's bedroom, which was where we kept all of our stock. And when we started, and we just kept needing to buy more and more and more and more. But when 32 meg memory cards are $300 plus cost price, it's difficult to hold. At one point we had about $300,000 worth of stock at any given point in time. But when we first started out, we'd have $5,000 worth of stock, and we thought, oh my God, that's a whole lot of stock. And you're exposed to currency movements. So that was one of the first times in my life I started to have to think about currency movements. And memory was a commodity, and it was also falling in price very, very rapidly at that point too. So those were the two things that were really hard about our business. The growth was the best bit because it was growing so fast that we didn't really have to worry about, is this business going to succeed? We knew it was going to succeed. Within 60 days of launch, we knew the website was going to succeed. What was difficult was managing the growth and the money required. Fortunately, my business partner was pretty wealthy, and so he was able to put, I put all my technical skill into the business and my marketing skill into the business, but I didn't put any money into the business. My business partner put all the money in the business. And he started out, put about $60,000 into our business for stock. So it was a big investment for him, but he knew it was going to go big. And So those were the three things. It was how do you manage your growth without hurting the customer experience, because you don't want to run out of product, you don't want to be out of stock of half of your items, because that just pisses people off. How do you manage currency movements, because the currency was pretty volatile at that time. It still is reasonably volatile, but nothing like it was back then. How do you manage a commodity product? So if you don't sell through your products fast enough, you need to hold a lot of product because you're selling a lot of product, but if for some reason a range or a line or a product doesn't sell, and you get stuck with that product, and then within 2 months it's halved in price at the retail level, well, you're going to sell it for a loss. Is that what you have to do to clear the stock before it's worth zero? And remember, so 32 meg, 64 meg, 128 meg, 256 meg, they kept coming out with larger and larger memory cards very rapidly at radically reduced prices. So prices were falling, sizes were increasing, and the number of formats of memory cards were increasing. So we started out with smart media cards, and that was pretty much it. And then smart media morphed, okay? Then memory stick came out. Then we had secure digital came out. We had compact flash. Compact flash was originally, that was the second major memory format to hit the market after smart media. So smart media was the paper thin memory cards. You probably don't even remember what they looked like. And I knew that digital photography was going to be massive, and so there were no smartphones then. These memory cards were 100% for digital cameras. And so digital cameras, digital photography was becoming the absolute norm. And so cameras were on the way out, film cameras on the way out, digital photography was on the way in. And so those were the three really challenging bits for us to manage, and as we grew, those were the three big things that always impacted our business. Then technology still was a constraint. So we had to build out. There was no standardized order management system. It was literally, you go into the back end, you go into admin. There at least was an admin on eCommerce, which was nice, because most platforms didn't have an admin. You could go into the admin, you could pull up an order, you could literally print it out. What was on your screen, you could print out, and that became your pick slip, basically. Then you could go and pick it, and you could put it in a pack, you could hand write the delivery address, which is what we did. We literally hand wrote delivery addresses on every single parcel we shipped out. There was no automated order management. It did not exist. So we built one. So I had a friend of mine who was a tech geek, and he was the geekiest guy I knew. I don't actually remember even where I met him initially. I know where I met him. I met him through our local Linux users group. So I was part of a local Linux users group, and I met this guy. He was a young kid. He was only about 14, I think, at the time. But he was a programmer. He was from South Africa. And he could program in almost any language. And he was just amazing, absolutely amazing. And so I contracted him to work for our business to improve the website. And so we architected up, which was literally drawing on a hand-drawn piece of paper, what we wanted the workflow to look like for order management from the time a product came into the business, how it gets handled in the business, how it gets handled on the website, how it gets uploaded, how the information gets uploaded to the website, how it gets enriched, where do we get the images from, how do we sell it, and then how do we actually ship it out. So in New Zealand at that time, there was no automated track and trace systems, for example. So what we did is we built a full-blown barcode scanning system that allowed us to use a thermal printer to print out the address labels from our platform. So that was the first time. So we didn't actually have to handwrite address labels anymore. We could print them to a thermal printer. And what we did was we built it so that the order ID number from open source commerce would be converted into a barcode. And so what would happen was you'd scan that barcode once. That would open up the order in the database. Then we would scan the track and trace number as the second scan, and that track and trace number would be uploaded to the database and attached to that order ID number. And that second scan is what would close the order off as shipped. They would marry up the order ID number with the track and trace number, and then what we did was we automatically triggered off an email that sent the customer a link to their track and trace number. So the way we did that was there was no automated track and trace. So what we did is all that was a URL with the tracking number built into the URL, so that when they clicked on it, they were actually automatically taken to the Courier Post website, pre-populated in the URL with their tracking number, so they could actually see the tracking for their product directly online. So there was no API. There was no API we could connect to. They didn't offer it. So there was no way we could push or pull data in an easy, seamless way from Courier Post. It didn't exist. In fact, just after we started our website, they built the first API, but you had to buy all of their hardware. So you had to buy their printer, you had to buy their scanners, you had to buy their software. It was desktop software. So you had to buy effectively their warehouse management system from Courier Post in order to implement that. And we were like, no, we aren't going to be paying for that because it was thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So I paid our programmer about $1,000. He programmed the whole thing up in the span of about 2 weeks. We tested it and we went live with it. And we were one of the first companies. In fact, I think we may have even been the first. I'm not aware of anyone else that was sending tracking data to their customers at that time. There may have been, but there certainly weren't a lot of them. And we were certainly one of the first, if not the first, to send automated track and trace emails to our customers in New Zealand.
You know what you guys should do? Stop selling America, sell that solution.
Yeah, we did actually consider that for a while.
You got your tomato right there.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's the lessons I learned through that whole thing were technology was moving ridiculously fast. It still is. Digital hasn't changed. If anything, it's gotten even faster than that point in time, but it was getting fast even at that point in time. ERPs in New Zealand didn't really exist. They did for the very, very large enterprise class customers. CRM didn't exist. It was only for enterprise class customers. We were a small business growing very, very fast. We didn't know who our customers were. We were running, for our newsletter, so our newsletter, we had over 10,000 subscribers on our newsletter list. So this was when email was actually still read. This was actually when people gave a shit about email. We sent plain text emails, okay, we were in business for over 7 years. For the first, I think it was almost 4 years, we sent plain text emails to our customers with URL hyperlinks in there that they had to cut and paste into their browser. And they did. Even when MailChimp and I can't remember what some of the very first email sending platforms were that came out, but what we did is we switched to HTML-based emails, but the template was a standard header and footer template that was built into our back end. And then I had our programmer in the admin build in a WYSIWYG editor. It was some off-the-shelf WYSIWYG tool that got embedded in the back end of the website so that I could take that template and I could actually put HTML links and I could do colors and I could actually embed images of product into the emails and all that sort of stuff. So that was my first experience with email. It was amazing. We just sent blast emails to everyone. It was the same email to everyone. Fuck, what was segmentation? We had absolutely no idea what segmentation was. All 10,000 subscribers got the exact same fucking email. CRM, our CRM system was our e-commerce platform. So what we did is we had a bit of a unique, we had a warranty. It was a signature warranty called the We'll Make It Right warranty. And it was basically, we will do whatever it takes. There's no, of course, we will abide by all the laws of New Zealand, a standard 12-month warranty on stuff. But going above and beyond that, we said, look, whatever it takes within reason that we can actually achieve and do for you, we will make it right. So technically speaking, our warranty, for example, was a return-to-base warranty. If you had a fault, you sent the product back, we tested it. If it was faulty, we'd send you a new one. Now, that never happened. In the entire time I ran that business with my business partner, not once did we require a customer to send the product back first. We would simply send them, and they would notify us there was a problem. We would send them, as long as it was still within a reasonable warranty period, we'd simply send them brand new product or the current equivalent if that product wasn't made anymore. And we would send a free return pouch, a free courier return pouch in the courier pouch that we were sending to them, pre-addressed with our address, so that all they had to do, they pulled out the replacement product, they'd pull out the courier pouch, they'd stick the faulty product in it, they'd ring an 0800 number, and the courier would pick up the parcel to return to us. So it was these types of things. I mean, I think the thing that transcended everything in our business, and I think the reason we were so successful, there was a couple of really simple things we did. First of all, we had an 0800 number. We were the only business in our vertical that had a free phone number. And we were the only ones that allowed the free phone number to be called from a cell phone. Okay? So we were covering all of that cost. Now, back then it was pretty expensive to have an 0800 number. It's cheap now, but we had an 0800 number. And so customers could call us from anywhere, from any phone, and it didn't cost them anything. And they did. Shitloads and shitloads and shitloads of customers called us, asking questions about products. Are you really real? Are you in New Zealand? You sound like an American. Are you in the States? Honestly, the questions we got, it was the internet. It was like, oh my God, there's a website that sells the stuff I want. Are they real? And the most common question was, are you in Nicaragua? I don't know what the thing was with Nicaragua. I have no idea. Was that where a hotbed of internet crime at the time? I don't know. but that seemed to be the common question. Are you in New Zealand? So email contact was really important to us, and we sent an email per week, and it was to everyone. Free phone was very important to us, and responding to queries and that warranty service. So it's still, as it was then, as it is today, the customer service component and the care and the engagement that you have with your customers it was then and it still is the most important thing. And that's why we grew, and that's how we grew, and then we didn't sell the business fast enough. So my final piece of advice was we grew massively fast, and then what happened was memory fell to the point in price to where it was started to be bundled for free with everything. So your Harvey Normans, your camera stores, your everybody, all of a sudden the memory didn't cost anything. Because if you bought a $1,500 camera from Camera and Camera, they give you a 128 meg memory card for free with that camera. Or when you bought when smartphones started to become common and the micro SD started to come out, well, they'd give you a 128 meg memory card with your phone. And so one of two things happened. Either they would sell it as a loss leader just to draw traffic. So if they were selling standalone memory cards, the retailers were selling it at half their cost price just to get people in the door to buy the shit that it went into. Or they were giving it away free with the other shit that they were selling. So for us, that became a really big challenge to our business model. We tried to diversify very quickly into other products, but our brand name was flashcards.co.nz. And our phone number was 0800-FLASH-1. So it was like, that was everything about our brand had to do with memory cards. And so it was really difficult to diversify into other ranges when our customers didn't have any faith in us that we knew anything about those other products. We did, but it was very hard to convert them into other ranges. We had an offer to sell our business about 2 years before that happened, and we didn't take it. They didn't want to pay us enough. I think the offer was about $1 million or something like that, and I wish I could go back and do it again. So my final piece of advice around that is, there's a time and a place for every business, and some businesses are there for the long haul, and they can morph and they can change, or you're a mighty ape, and you can go from being a video game shop basically to an everything retailer like an Amazon. So that sometimes does happen, but there's far more examples in the marketplace of businesses that aren't unicorns. I consider those guys unicorns. I consider Amazon a unicorn. There's many thousands more businesses that have tried to do an Amazon, have tried to do a mighty ape and failed. Those are the true unique players that have managed to morph fast enough to keep up with the market. So we ended up selling to a small mom and pop business they were doing something else. The wife wanted to basically retire and run a small online business from home, and flashcards.co.nz is still running to this day, and she still runs it from home.
Are they still running right now?
It's still running today. They still sell memory cards.
On eCommerce.
Yeah, they still sell memory cards.
On eCommerce.
No, they're on something else now.
Oh, right. I was just thinking like, how many security vulnerabilities out there?
Yeah. So I guess that's my piece. That's my history. That's my background. That's how I got to be where I am. And then after that, after we finally sold that business, my business partner had actually already moved on. He got headhunted by a very large company. He got headhunted in New Zealand first. He worked in New Zealand for a year, and now he works for the largest dairy company in the Middle East, Al Mirai, and he's making just stupid amounts of money working for them in sourcing and market trading basically for them. So the cautionary tale is, if you have an opportunity to sell a business that has some good value, and you can go do something else and try something else and do another startup, then sometimes that's the right choice. If you don't think you can make the pivot fast enough in your business to adapt and be successful, sell the business. Sell it to someone bigger. Sell it to someone faster. Sell it to someone with more capital. That would be my piece of advice.
Cool, great. Well, thanks for sharing.
No worries.
So I do have one question.
Yes.
The return process that you guys did back then, not a lot of companies are offering them, even today, considering the courier price is even cheaper. It should be cheaper back,
Correct. It's cheaper now.
It's cheaper now compared to what you guys back then, but you still did that regardless. What would you, you paid a higher price, all right, by sending the the courier tracking, the courier package and stuff. Would you do that again, or would you what kind of benefit that you got out of that?
That I'll tell you the benefit, and it was really obvious actually. So we would say that today we would call what we were doing back then building customer advocacy. And we saw that customer advocacy in forums. So one of the ways that we knew that we were doing well is that I had Google Alerts. When Google first started allowing alerts, I started tracking every mention of our name. And so they were spidering all the major forums for photography and for phones and for everything else. And so I would get an alert in my inbox anytime there was our domain or our name mentioned. I would get an email alert, and I'd immediately go and check it out and make sure that somebody wasn't complaining, or make sure that they weren't unhappy or talking shit about us, or a competitor talking shit, or whatever. And I would immediately jump into the conversation if necessary. But I think, to your point, I never had to do that. I would go and look, but typically we would have, within minutes of anything negative being posted or even questions being asked about our business, we'd have 5 or 6 people on those forum threads jump in and go, I bought from them for 3 years, they're awesome, never had a problem, amazing service, I had a problem with the product once, they sent me out a new product with a free return pouch. So in terms of customer advocacy, we didn't really have to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff in terms of the relationship with our customers, because we were so proactive in the beginning that nobody had anything bad to say about us. How the fuck can you say something bad about a company that was doing what we were doing? There was nothing to complain about. So yeah, I would say yes. If there's any way, shape, or form you can do a value add, then you just do it. If you can financially manage to afford to bring more value than what the customer expects, if you can, the catchphrase is surprise and delight, I think nowadays. If you can surprise and delight, you fucking do it every single time. So the answer is yes.
Cool. Appreciate it. So, you say that, one they have normal experience, buy something, they receive that's it, that's what people are expecting, and it's only make the difference one day actually had a bad experience about the product, and what you guys do after that is what made the memory, what defines how they think about your company.
Yeah, I think that was part of it. We also, even from day one, day one on OS Commerce, we had a custom development added to it. It didn't have the idea of transactional emails. It didn't really do transactional emails. So what we did is we had not only transactional emails built for order confirmation and order shipment and track and trace and all that, but we set up automated follow-up emails as well. So after 2 weeks, they would get one automated follow-up email that said, thank you for shopping with us. You should have had a chance to use your product by now. Hope you're loving it, but if you're not, let us know and we'll do whatever we can to make sure that you do. Then another 2 weeks after that, we would send a product review email out. And we would say, if you enjoy the product and you have something valuable to say and add to the discussion about the product, please go to our website, leave a testimonial, basically. And that was hugely successful. We had thousands and thousands of product reviews and thousands of testimonials. And so for us, that communication, that automated communication that had a heart behind it, we were actually genuine. And we would often get people saying, oh, it doesn't seem to be working right or whatever. And 9 times out of 10, when something didn't work right, it wasn't actually a failed product, it was because they bought the wrong card for their device. So, when, like Memory Stick Pro, for example, when it came out, which was for Sony devices, Memory Stick Pro was too fast for 95% of the Sony products on the market. They could only take standard Memory Stick. So people would buy the Memory Stick Pro because you couldn't get standard Memory Stick anymore. They deprecated it because it was so slow, but they still were selling millions of devices that needed the product. And so they would buy the Memory Stick Pro product because that's what they could get, and it's fit in the same slot, but the device couldn't read it. And this happened with tons and tons of memory cards. So compact flash, same thing. They came out with speeds and sizes that most devices couldn't read. Then the same thing happened with Secure Digital. Secure Digital, they came out with high-speed Secure Digital. Half the devices in the market couldn't read it. So that was a tricky one because in those instances there wasn't actually anything wrong with the product. They just bought the wrong thing. And so the way we handled that was, in those instances, we did make the customer return the product. We wouldn't just send them a free product and a free return pouch if it wasn't actually faulty. But what we would typically do with most of those memory cards, you can reformat them in their sweet as. And as long as they'd only been inserted like once, you usually couldn't even tell that they'd been inserted into the camera. We could put them back in their carry case, their plastic carry case that they came with, and we could resell the product, and it wouldn't be a problem. We'd give the same warranty when we resold the product. So we would do that. We would take a swap or a return, but they would have to send them to us. So that's how we handle that situation.
Did you try rebrand at all?
Our own brand?
Yeah.
We tried non-branding. So we had, what we did is we had little labels, branded labels, that we put on every single product we sent out. The other thing we did was inside every single parcel that we sent out, we sent a branded pen, but a really fucking nice one. Not a shitty fucking cheap ass pen, but a really nice one. And we also sent 2 business cards, 2 branded business cards with what we did on the back with a short listing of products and all of our contact details and everything on the front. Sent out 2 business cards, and we used very expensive business cards. They were matte laminated. They were fucking really nice business cards, full color. They were amazing looking business cards. And so people were actually proud to get those business cards when they opened a parcel, and they'd give them to their mates in the office. And we also did overnight shipping, and we had special arrangement with Courier Post that they would pick up our parcels after 7 p.m. So we would literally pack parcels until 7 p.m. when the courier. So if an order came in at 6:30, our official order cutoff time was like 4. But if an order came in at 6:30 and the courier hadn't been yet, we would pack that shit and we would send it out, and they would get it the next morning, New Zealand wide. So we paid for overnight courier, New Zealand wide, except for rural, which would typically take an extra day. So we paid extra for that. And I tell you, when you have a scenario where somebody receives a parcel when they've ordered at 6:30 p.m. at night and it arrives on their desk at 8 a.m. in the morning, they freak the fuck out. They seriously freak the fuck out. They go, how the fuck did you get that to us in overnight? Wow. And so what's the first thing they do? They go, wow, that was fast. Hey mate, do you need a thing for your phone or your camera? Here's a business card. Go and check these guys out. Don't shop anywhere else.
Yeah. What I was meaning by rebranding was,
White labeling.
well, no, when
We
the
pivoted, like,
environment changed, you know, and the industry changed, rebranding to not just be flashcards, but to be New Zealand cameras direct or something.
Yeah, we thought about it, but then you're effectively building a brand from scratch.
And
And
you got the customer database there.
yeah, we seriously considered it. I think by that point it was one of those scenarios where it would have been really quite challenging. We did sell cameras for a while through the Flashcards website, which was a pretty tight tie-in to what we were selling already. But we just couldn't compete. There was no way that we could compete and buy the volumes required to compete with the large retailers at that time. And by that point, most of the major players had gone online and they were selling cameras online. So they were selling any of the related pivots that we could have made. There were some pretty dominant players in the space already, so it would have been very difficult for us to carve out a niche at that point. So yeah, that was we considered kind of all of those options, but they were all really challenging
But
options.
when you think about it now, like after 10, 15 years, is there any, like, you know, with all your current knowledge, is there any chance that you can turn that business around?
I think what we would have done better, so by that point, content marketing was actually starting to become a thing, you know, after almost 8 years of being in that business. So YouTube was starting to really take off. You know, video was starting to become a lot more common at that point, not necessarily video on the website, but certainly video on the video platforms themselves. And I think the one thing that I would have done a lot more of is to go out. So we had a huge number of our customers were professional photographers. So I would have actually partnered with a lot of those photographers, and I would have got them to review products and actually probably would have started a blog, for example, because there was a lot of very successful photography blogs at that point, and I think there would have been some really valuable content. And I think that, you know, would that have been able to compete with the bundling that the retailers were doing? It would have been hard, I think. But we would have had a lot more options, I think, at that point. If we'd have been able to maintain a growing customer base, I think through content we could have continued to grow the customer base in new ways and diversify in better ways. But we only had an e-commerce website with very little content. It had specs for the products, and that was and links out to the manufacturer's website about that product. But that was it. So we didn't do any content marketing at all, and that was probably our biggest weakness.
So, first off, I really think it was the 80s. You could have rebranded and pivoted and basically sold flash comment cards. Flashcards.co.nz. I mean, awesome.
Yep.
You know, absolutely. But unfortunately, it wasn't the 80s. So now you moved out of that, and you said you went to the agency world.
Yeah.
Now, there's a difference there, isn't there? Because Here you have your own business, which you're supremely into. You're going to work all those hours late at night to do it. And now you're in agency world where you have to do the same thing, or at least say you're going to do the same thing, but for 30 other people.
Yes.
Now, what did you take from that, and from that world, where it was your own business, and put into the agency world, in that kind of whole different environment?
That's a very good question, and I think one of the things is that one of the advantages I had over all of my other agency peers at that time, now it's not as common nowadays, but at that time, I was the only one in my entire agency that had ever run an e-commerce business. So all of the people that I worked with, they were servicing merchants, but they had never been a merchant. They had never worked in a merchant. They had never worked merchant side. And so all of their knowledge, like literally all of it, was 100% theoretical. It was not practical in any way, shape, or form. So I think that when I started liaising with clients, especially around digital marketing, and by that stage I knew a lot more about Google Analytics, and I was becoming a lot more well-rounded in my digital knowledge. I knew a lot more about commerce platforms. I knew a lot more about big data. Well, it wasn't called big data then, just data. I knew a lot more about, analytics was probably the game changer in that respect of actually being able to assess the success, the pros, cons, strengths, weaknesses of digital businesses. I think that became a big thing. The other thing that I brought to the table was an absolute acute understanding of where attention was in terms of where the audience attention was going. And I remember to this day when I got interviewed at Exceed, Facebook was relatively new at that point. I think it's only been out about a year or maybe a year and a half at that stage. But I knew, even then, I watched an entire transaction take place on my Facebook wall. It was one of my friends, their washing machine cracked out. They posted to their wall, hey, my washing machine has quit working. I haven't bought a washing machine in 10 years. Has anybody bought a washing machine recently? What was it? Where did you buy it? What was the price? And is it good? And I saw that, and I saw a whole bunch of people respond to that on Facebook. They went and they bought it from one of the places that the people had recommended. They never did a Google search. They never clicked on an AdWords ad. They never did anything in the search space. It was 100% social authority and social validation and social interaction. And I talked about that in my interview. I remember talking about that and saying, what do we do in a post-Google world? What does it look like for businesses in a post-Google world? And even then, I was starting to think about, shit, this social media thing's fucking big, and it's going to become real big. Twitter obviously was finding its feet. It was getting big. Tumblr was getting big. There was a lot of other social platforms that were really starting to hit their stride at that time, and they were actually starting to build multi-million person audiences at that time. And I started to see in the old bulletin board days, so if you think pre-Google, right, bulletin boards, I saw that era. I saw the ICQ era. I saw the pre-Google era, and what I saw happening on social was an absolute mirror of what I had seen happen in the old bulletin board, verticalized bulletin board space. And so I saw, shit, okay, Google's vulnerable. Google's very vulnerable, and they're vulnerable, and therefore, by definition, businesses like mine, where I basically built my success on the back of AdWords, I said, look, all of these businesses that are relying on AdWords for their traffic, AdWords inflation was already at that point running at about 12% per year. And so the cost for acquisition for businesses was going through the fucking roof. And so our clients in particular were coming to us saying, I can't pay to acquire customers at this price. How the fuck am I going to acquire new customers? Then you start having discussions around added value. Then you start having discussions around remarketing. Then you start having discussions around conversion rate optimization. Because if you're going to pay to acquire a customer, A, you need to really understand what the customer lifetime value is. Because remember, at that point, in the original agency space, nobody fucking talked about customer lifetime value. Nobody had a fucking clue what a customer, they had no idea from their data what their customer lifetime value was, unless they were a big company and they had a CRM, then they knew. But 99, in fact, I can't think of a single business I worked with that knew what their customer lifetime value was with any sort of accuracy. And as a result of that, they were looking at acquisition costs purely on first conversion. They weren't saying, okay, fuck, I only have to pay to acquire this customer once, and if they buy it off me for 5 times in 1 year, well then I divide that acquisition cost by 5. it's cheap then, right? So you start to have to expand the customer's thinking or the merchant's thinking around things like acquisition and what those true costs are. So it's about expanding their thinking, and then it's about driving efficiencies in their business too. So we automated that whole shipping, track, trace, scan, that whole thing. That was fully automated, and all the printing and everything. So what I would do typically is I would go into a business and I would do a full day, or 2 half days or 3 partial days or whatever of discovery on site, literally sitting with every single department manager, watching from the moment a product came into their business to the moment the product went out of their business, and finding how we could digitalize as many of those steps as possible, reduce headcount if possible, or convert them into better value-added responsibilities. So it was those two things. It was okay, let's broaden the discussion from I can't pay to acquire customers anymore to, well, actually what you need to do is you need to better understand what your customer, who they are, how much value they're actually bringing to you as a business over time. And then secondarily, so that's above the line, so looking at revenue generation and all the components of that. And then below the line, how can we carve out cost and bring digital savviness, if you will, instead of just it being a front-end exercise to it being a pan-business digital transformation before that was even a buzz term. Saying, how can we transform you digitally, front, back, and everything in between, to bring levels of marketing automation and other things to the business, and acquisition that was much more inbound, conceptually, much more inbound marketing.
So it sounds like you weren't just doing digital marketing at all.
No,
you were doing operations as well.
Yeah,
as well as that.
when I first started with the business, I was an account manager on the digital marketing team.
Right.
So I was always paired with an implementer. So I didn't do implementation of the digital marketing. I strategized with the client for digital marketing. I analyzed their Google Analytics data, made recommendations, and then I had a partner in the business that we were basically a duo. So when we would meet with the client, the implementer was sitting next to me. I was the strategist and the relationship person.
Right.
And we would thrash it out. We'd get the customer to agree, and then we'd go away and do shit. Then, after about 2 years of being on the digital marketing team, then I became a full-blown end-to-end e-business consultant. So I would, from the first moment we met a customer, right through to a build, a development into post-live, I would follow them through that process, and I would do all the scoping, I would do the on-site discovery and all that. So I was doing full business architecture for clients at that point.
And one other thing is, like you said, technology keeps growing. And I mentioned that there's so many different social networks out there. I mean, recently in the news, Pinterest just bought Instapaper, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we've got all that going on. So how do you keep up with all of that? Not just the fact that it's Valley news, but local, nationwide news, or say just Australasian news.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you differentiate between them? Because I know I definitely get stuck in a bracket at this sort of distorted view that's based primarily from reading Hacker News or Silicon Valley news, and I completely forget nationwide news, at least in the tech sphere. So how do you differentiate all those different,
I guess for me, it's always been a natural part of who I am. I'm a naturally curious person, so it's probably part of my personality, for one. So I'm not satisfied with just having someone tell me how something works. I really kind of need to know it, and I need to know it by tasting it. I need to taste it. And so for me, social media, I only really started getting active on social media probably 2 years ago. I've always been active on Facebook, like almost from day one. I was very active on Facebook, managed very large Facebook groups, so I knew the power of Facebook. And as Facebook started to morph into more of a business tool, and I actually think that Facebook killing off organic reach was the best fucking thing that could have ever happened to that platform. It started to differentiate content on the platform. Their algorithm changes to the feed made a big difference, because instead of it being a fucking fire hose, now it was a scalpel, and it was based on a lot more relevance, a la Google style. And I think that there's arguments to be made either way for that, but certainly I think I was able to spot changes at Facebook really early on, because I was on that platform for hours every single day. And so, but I had to start doing that with many more things, right? And for me, until a platform, if a platform's getting, 50 million active users a day, fuck, That's an audience you can no longer ignore. And sure, now I've got to think about Snapchat, and I've got to think about Instagram, and I've got to think about Twitter, less so nowadays. I've got to think about Facebook. I've got to think about Periscope. I've got to think about those things. But if you're in those platforms a lot, you can spot changes even before the press has said that they're coming. You can go, shit, okay, that's different. Let's play with that. Let's spend 15 minutes playing with that new shit there, that shiny thing there. And I always frame it in the context of business. So for me, yeah, I do some personal social stuff, but there's always a reason behind it. It's whether I'm trying to acquire a new audience, or I'm trying to broaden my audience, to broaden my affinity for building an audience in a certain way.
So can you say you have two personas online? Your personal and then your...
Not really. I do on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is exclusively business. It's exclusively building my brand.
Right. Okay.
So I don't do any marketing for HealthPost on LinkedIn. It's Jason. That's it.
All right.
And in fact, most of my work on social is building Jason's brand, the Jason Greenwood brand. That's what it's about. I will mention HealthPost. Like, obviously, a lot of what I talk about on my web series, for example, is real life shit that I'm going through every single day in my day job. And I'll go, at HealthPost, we're doing this. So this is what I learned from doing that. So this is what I think can help you. So of course there's a mention of my employer, but it's not primarily to build the HealthPost brand. It's primarily to build the Jason Greenwood brand. Because I need to have a certain amount of brand equity in me. If I'm going to bring value to a bigger audience, I need to have brand equity that can get bums on seats.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, your videos are definitely improved. Yeah, you're moving away from the camera a little bit more.
Cool. Thanks. It's all practice, right? I'd love to have somebody following me around. That's what I'd really like to have. I would like to have a full-time videographer and editor. That's all they did, and then I could put out some pretty shit hot content. But
summer's coming soon. You get some college kids on video.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe some interns, whatever. Then I could do some really
You
good
use a
stuff.
GoPro.
Yeah.
So just gotta turn it off in the shower. That's all.
Yeah, I don't think anybody needs to see that.
Good boss.
But no, good questions. Other questions?
I have a question. I think it's really simple or not to answer, but I was wondering about segmentation. Because, very interesting that you said in the past, but today is not work anymore.
Yeah.
You cannot send the same mail, one size does not fit all. But from the perspective that I have, that is not quite large or brand, I see that really small businesses, they have some barriers. They cannot do segmentation because you have some technology stuff or cost or lack of knowledge to do that. And my question is how to manage it for really, really small businesses, like, I don't know, someone that built a site using Wix, I don't know, how to segment and how to do something that will really help this kind of business, I think I know the answer, but to discuss,
Sure. I think it's still too hard and it's still too expensive for small businesses that are trying to wear a marketing hat, they're trying to wear a sales hat, they're trying to wear a sourcing hat, they're trying to wear an admin hat, they're trying to be a technologist, they're trying to be a lawyer, they're trying to be an accountant, they're trying to do all those things, right? Because they're running a business on a shoestring. By definition, a small business, they try to do everything themselves. I know, because we had to in the beginning too, right? So I know how that goes. I would say that the sooner a business can get to a place that they're medium-sized instead of small, however they have to do it, the sooner they can get there, the sooner they can succeed, truly succeed. I think that small businesses are truly fighting for survival nowadays. I think startup, unless you are a funded startup, so unless you have angel investors, if you're doing it literally self-funded, bootstrapping. So if you're bootstrapping your startup today, it's going to be tough. It's going to be very, very tough. You won't be able to segment. That's the reality. You can do micro segmentation, manually looking at your database, looking at purchase history, recency, frequency, lifetime value. You can start looking at those things, and Google Analytics will allow you to do a certain amount of segmentation anyway, but it's more aggregated segmentation. So you can then start to craft the customer journey based on anonymized segments. So you can still do segmentation, but you will never be able to do one-to-one segmentation, which is, in marketing, is the fucking holy grail. Okay? One-to-one segmentation is the holy grail of any business. If you can't do that as a small business. It's fucking impossible. And even if you could segment down to one-to-one, how the fuck are you going to create content one-to-one? How the hell are you going to do that? You can't do it. So what's the point of segmenting when you can't serve those segments anyway? So there's actually no point in segmenting when you're small. So do aggregated segments and do big segments and maybe have 4 different kinds of content for 4 different customer profiles and 4 segments and call it good. And fucking build your business. Build relationships. Spend more time on fucking social media. Spend more time creating valuable content. Spend more time, doing biz dev partnerships with people that are well aligned with you but are not competitors to you. Fucking hit the streets. Go and you just gotta hustle. You just gotta be really, really hungry when you first start a startup, especially if you're bootstrapping. You just gotta be really clever. You just gotta exploit every single way you possibly can to grow your business, because segmentation isn't gonna do it for you anyway.
Yeah, my idea on that is that, as a small business, depending on how small you are, the number of priorities to grow the database, not to segment it.
Correct.
Like segmentation only comes into play when you have a certain amount of, of database, right? It's just no point when you have 100, 200 audience, there's just no point segmenting them. Yeah, screw it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Or you have a clear split on your online presence in verticals already, which makes sense, and which are natural segmentations, even when you have a smaller database. So if you're selling things like completely disparate kind of categories of products, then it makes sense to start from the beginning.
Yeah.
You can guarantee that people who are buying mobile phones are not going to be buying, I don't know,
A refrigerator.
cosmetics or other things at the same time.
Yeah.
Sometimes those cross over, but most of the time they're separate, so you can just start segmenting straight away.
I mean, you would definitely want to buy your cosmetics with your refrigerator. I think it makes sense.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
That's what you do.
Actually, there are a lot of women that have the cosmetics at the refrigerator. So
See?
Yeah.
or get-
So there you go. Maybe there's some effective cross-sell opportunities.
Refrigerator, I wasn't talking about that.
I have seen one development based only for in a special place for women to put their cosmetics.
So this is a space in the fridge.
Yeah.
Right.
For the cosmetics.
Wow.
Right
But
next to your husband's
what's
room.
going
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Is warfarin.
But I was going to say, I used to have a small business of my own. I used to segment it, trying to interact more with my customers so I could understand them. And of course, the first offer you do as generic as you can, but then by having a small business, you can actually know better your customers.
Yeah.
So you go more by feeling and testing and seeing how the customer reacts to you, if the customer ignores you or if the customer gives you a good answer. So then you can create your business like that. I used to separate the way I communicate with my customers by different kinds of social media. So I knew that Facebook is more open-minded, but Twitter has to be more specific, and my customers would respond differently in each one of them. For example, my business was coffee shop and travel agency, so at Instagram it worked better with food, but Facebook worked better with travel, so I knew how to communicate with each one of them, and that was how I segmented. The other thing that I was going to say is I used to work for HW, which is a big group. They have thousands and millions of that database. They do a lot of stuff. They send a lot of email, and we used to do a lot of tests. So I know that segmentation is something very important, but every time we had some kind of fights and discussions is because I didn't like, because they used to send a lot of emails and full of information, and I said, oh, come on, that's crap. It's against what the world is talking about. Let's work better on segmentation, but usually the best results that we had weren't segmented.
Granularly
Even though we
segmented.
used to clone the database, to do the whole statistic thing and try all the tests and do a lot of stuff, but every time that we put some, in the end, a mix of whatever products, the result was better. For any reason that we never know, because the customer might want to buy only one kind of thing, but maybe that same consumer has another problem in this person's life.
Or their child does, or
Oh, the parent, a friend, whatever, maybe that's there. So it's important, the segmentation, but sometimes it's not all. And knowing your customer, relating to that, and committing mistakes, and learning on the mistakes, I think it's a good lesson too.
Well, with that, I think a lot of things is to do with training your customer base as well all the time. So you can't expect one experiment to give you results because they're not trained. They don't expect it because you've been peppering them with multiple contents for the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Suddenly, if you start targeting them, they're going, "What the hell's going on here?" So you got to kind of work out how to slowly transition them into that and get them used to it. And it's just like any other animal. You train it and they behave like you want them to. So the other thing is, once you do start segmenting, if you want to address what you're just saying, that maybe sometimes you're not just interested in those fragrances, but you want a mobile phone dropped in there, you can start applying chaos theory to your segmentation content. So just randomize something from some sort of remotely or second, third related category and throw that in, and then you can see how that works out.
yeah, speaking to that, I think personalization is one first step, and especially email personalization is probably an easier step than full-blown CRM, full-blown segmentation, full-blown customer lifecycle management. All that stuff becomes pretty complex and it becomes pretty expensive, but personalization tools now are becoming a lot cheaper, especially for email. Just even injecting a personalization block into emails based on their purchase history, based on what they've purchased, based on related products, whether it be from the same category, whether it be in the same price range, whether it be at the same gender, if you've got gendered products, whatever. I think that the challenge to that still in the industry is not a technological barrier, it's a structured data barrier. So almost every single merchant I worked with had virtually no structured data. That's a problem, because every single personalization tool, every single segmentation tool, every single everything, site search tool, SLI, Celebron, they all require structured data to perform well. Without it, they perform shitty. And that's just the reality. So if you're going to spend money on those tools, you need good structured data. And so when I say structured, you obviously know what structured data is. Does everybody know the difference between structured and unstructured data? As it relates to e-commerce, I think specifically is what I mean. Okay, so unstructured data. A description of a product is unstructured data. The name of a product is unstructured data, okay? Because it's different for every single product on your website. Anything that has commonality, so a product attribute, so let's say you have color swatches, or let's say you're a fashion brand and you've got red, blue, green, yellow, okay? And you have to select it from a drop down before you can decide which color of a shirt to add to your cart. Those colors are structured data because you don't have just one red shirt, maybe half of your catalog has red in it. And so you will then apply that attribute in bulk to a range of products, and that becomes an attribute field stored in the database against that particular product. So the more attributes you can apply to a product that apply to more than one product, those are the facets that are built up around your product, or filtered navigation. Those are great both from a front-end user experience. If I'm in a category with 1,000 products in it, and I want to filter down and I want to rapidly drill down into those 1,000 products to find the one I'm really looking for, then I need structured data in the database to be able to create the filters in the filter bar to start narrowing that down. So for example, in our business, we don't have structured data yet, and that's a major project we'll be undertaking in the new year, but we need to work with over 200 vendors and suppliers to get that structured data. So it's going to be a major 12-month project for us. So for us, things like organic, things like vegan, things like vegetarian, things like hypoallergenic, those are all product attributes for our products, because we're a natural products retailer. Those are all product attributes that form structured data against a product. So we could put the word organic, for example, in a description of a product, but unless it's structured data that's been applied as an attribute to a product, things like SLI, they can't wait. So if the word organic is in 1,000 descriptions, can't start to weight certain attributes any more highly than any others. The weighting is exactly the same. And so by having attributes in there, you can do things like, once again, if you're a fashion brand and you've got the color red, well, you might segment. If you've got a new red product that comes in, then you can segment by all of the customers that have bought red products before. They're likely to probably want to buy another red product again when you get a new red product. So structured data is massively important for the customer experience, and it's massively important for segmentation, and it's massively important for personalization. There's just no way of getting around it.
Did you hear about Endeca?
Yes. Yep, I've implemented Endeca before.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, it's very good. It's very expensive.
Yeah.
I think in the tier under Endeca, SLI and Celebros are much more affordable. They don't quite do, so you can't do dynamic nav with SLI and Celebros, but you can with Endeca. There's lots of things that Endeca does that's unique to them. Their biggest customer in the world, I think, from memory, is not Lowe's. What's the other massive home improvement place in the States?
Home Depot.
Home Depot, yes, Home Depot. I think that's the biggest Endeca customer. I think, at least they used to be, and they have full dynamic nav, the whole 9 yards.
What's the name of the other two vendors that it's
Celebros,
Celebros.
Celebros, and SLI Systems.
SLI?
SLI. Search, Learn, Improve is what that stands for. We run SLI on our site.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So yeah, site search is a biggie. Site search is a massive one. Personalization is another massive one, but once again, structured data just is so critical for any of those to really work well.
So it sounds like collect everything, as long as it's structured, just collect everything. Throw a little bit of chaos theory in there, put your cosmetics in with your refrigerators, or your blow-up dolls in with your flowers. I think that's actually a pretty big market.
That actually possibly is, now that I think about it, yeah.
I am thinking about a startup based around a brothel, flower shop, and a bar.
Now all you need is arms in there as well. Arms.
Arms?
Then you've got, yeah, guns.
Oh, right, well, obviously, yeah.
You gotta have those things in there as well.
I don't know, insurance might be too high.
Yeah.
But,
Won't you get arrested for running an online brothel for some platform?
hey, it's the internet. Anyone can be anyone.
Yeah.
But one other thing is the geopolitical stuff, because I know that affects affects everything, doesn't it? You can get social media news, you can find anything local happening, but then there's seasonal changes, there's geopolitical changes.
Sure.
And yeah, seasonal and geopolitical. I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Regulatory. So
Yeah, there you go.
so for us, regulatory is huge. So
Yeah.
in our vertical, regulatory constraints are one of our most challenging
Right, yeah.
business constraints. We are so heavily regulated. Regulators crawl all over our ass and up our ass and everywhere around our body. It's just crazy.
Right, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
for us, content is really challenging. So that's one of the reasons why I made a YouTube video specifically about how to create content for heavily regulated industries, because I know exactly how challenging that is. And there's so many regulated industries. There's a couple of things at play in regulated industries that can give you leverage if you're really clever about it. So one is UGC, user-generated content. So UGC that doesn't reside on any of your platforms or accounts is fair fucking game. So if my customer wants to publish a YouTube review that says my pill cured his gout, fucking fair game. It's on his YouTube channel.
Right. It's
Okay?
not, yeah,
It's
okay.
not ours.
Yeah,
Okay?
right.
So that's one of the reasons why we're implementing a brand new ground up rebuild of our loyalty program, because
Right.
we need to incentivize, we need to be able to do and encourage customers to do lots of actions other than just buy shit.
Yeah.
And that has value to us, has real true monetary value to our business. So iHerb in the States is one of the best in the world at what they do in our vertical. So they're the 800-pound gorilla. They're the biggest in the world, and everybody would like to be them. They've got over 60,000 SKUs. They're incredible. And what they did, and they were really clever about it, more clever than anyone else in the beginning of the industry in its early stages. And so what they did is they implemented a really clever referral program that instead of just paying you out a certain dollar amount or a certain points amount when you referred someone, it was effectively almost like a pyramid scheme in the sense that every time that person bought forever in the future, you would get a small cut of that sale, rewarded back to you in rewards. And then once you get over a certain number of rewards points, you can actually convert those into cash if you wanted, or they'd send you a fucking check. Now, if you put in iHerb into YouTube today, there's nearly 300,000 videos about iHerb products on YouTube. Only about 10 of those videos were made by iHerb. So they have mobilized an entire global sales force on their behalf where regulators can't fucking touch that content. So they don't have to worry about regulation. Okay? So they've been very smart about how they do that. There's a couple of other things you can do. So whilst I can't create content that talks about efficacy of my product, what I can do is I can go and I can interview, because most of the products we sell, the headquarters of the manufacturers are based here in Auckland, or a good chunk of them are anyway. What I can do is I can go and I can actually interview them. I can take a walk through their manufacturing facility, and I can talk about their brand and how committed to quality they are and the history of the brand. So I can do brand marketing on behalf of those suppliers that are so shit at it. So they're really bad. B2B businesses historically are really, really bad at telling brand stories. Really bad. And so by creating and spending money on creating content that they won't even create themselves, and it's unique to HealthPost, and being able to embed that on each product's brand page, and use it in other clever ways, I can now create content that is well outside the reach of regulators. Regulators can't tell you shit about how you pitch a brand, about how the story you tell.
But now I know that those regulations change. I mean,
Yes.
one of my previous clients was a legal highs guy, Matt Bowden. And when he came to us for work, he was completely legal, but he was going through that process of having to verify certain details about these chemicals, and then it became illegal. Luckily, I wasn't involved anymore after that. But in his situation, basically his entire e-commerce business was gone, and he's in debt, last I heard. Now, I'm not saying that's ever going to happen, because you guys sell legal stuff, but there's always a risk that some of the things that you guys are going to sell at some point will have implications later.
Natural Health
research.
Products Bill is
Yeah,
just
yeah.
about ready to be passed by our government.
Right,
And it's
okay.
going to outlaw a significant portion of the currently available natural health products in New Zealand.
So I'm curious, now, in that regard, no one knocks on your door and says, hey, so that thing's not legit anymore, get rid of it.
There actually is a regulatory body.
Oh, okay.
There actually is a regulatory body, yeah, absolutely. And mainly they're reactive, meaning
Right.
a consumer sees something on the website and they go, that's a
Okay.
claim that, that's fucking
Yeah.
bullshit. I'm going to report you to TAPS, which is the regulatory body,
Right.
and then they follow up on that, and if it is found, they
So,
can...
but you have to obviously keep up with it, so that you
Correct.
know in terms of the future stock
Correct.
and all that
We
sort
do.
of stuff. Okay.
We have an in-house naturopath. We have someone that I know through a natural health group that I manage online. We are getting her to write content for our business now, and she's a certified naturopath. She's also a certified homeopath, and she's also a certified herbalist. So she's very up to play, and she's recently been qualified. So she's very up to play with kind of where regulation is currently and what we can say and what we can't say. But it is a constant struggle for us.